Welcome, everybody. I just want to point out our new multicolored logo tonight. If you have the right 3D goggles on, you're going to be able to see something amazing, so maybe not. So my name's Tom Wiscombe. I am chair of the undergraduate department at SCI-Arc, and it's my great honor and pleasure to introduce Tim Morton tonight. I think you can probably look up his bio online, so I won't waste time doing that, talking about that. But I do want to say that he's here for this week at the school, and it's a great opportunity for all of you to continue to engage with him. I don't know if any of you were here last night, but he showed a great film that he worked on with Jeff Bridges. And he'll be here, other than tonight, he'll be here tomorrow at 4 p.m. doing another lecture here in the same space. And on Friday, he'll be here again in the same space at 2 p.m. discussing his work and ideas with Graham Harmon, who I see is in the front row. And obviously, if you're in the master class, you'll see him more often than that. So, okay, so to get started, one of the greatest things about Tim is that he opens doors in philosophy, doors we didn't even know were there. Maybe all good philosophers do this, but in Tim's case, his whole body of work seems to be about moving through these doorways instead of shoring up the castle. He brings ideas of communication and empathy to the table, things that are sometimes difficult for philosophy to contend with, linking pleasure and kindness to deep ontological ideas about the universe. His goal is no less than to create solidarity between all things, human and non-human, a task that sounds as much a social project as one of philosophy. But this is not your granddaddy's social project. I like the title of Tim's recent book, Humankind, Solidarity with Non-Human People. This idea of non-human people is intriguing. I thought I had misread it the first few times that I saw it. He's asking us to engage all things in the world as specific entities with their own style and demeanor, as we might engage people we know. Regarding a German shepherd as a person is weird, but not as weird as regarding a bottle cap or a black hole as a person. That is expert level. To call a non-human entity a person is, of course, not to anthropomorphize them, but rather to allow ourselves to open our eyes to the liveliness and enchantment of beings at all scales around us. Of course, we can't expect Bengal tigers, snowy mountains, and fire ants to march on Washington alongside people, but the point isn't to draw other entities into the human struggle. The point is that we are inside ecology, and ecology is inside us, and that constitutes a new kind of intimacy. Maybe being ecological is like sitting side by side in a car, driving into the future with someone you love. You feel together, yet somehow alien, charming each other along the way with little comments and stories to pass the time. This is a picture of my house. I think about my house this way, as a collection of parts. It starts to bring me into this whole discussion. The cats, the cockroaches, the human inhabitants, the leaky dishwasher at the bottom, the fountain, the Cuban concrete tiles, all laid out on a table with a circle around them. The house, the circle, is larger and contains these other things. However, it is still just one thing alongside all the other things on the table. Sounds like a conundrum, but wait a while, sit with it. The scene begins to scale and adjust like a lens coming into focus. Slowly you realize the fact that there is a reality outside human values, hierarchies, categories, independent of us. It's a realization that is terrifying and freeing at the same time. In architecture, one of the most calcified ideas is what we call part to whole. Part to whole is a classical idea that attempts to deal with the fact that architecture is made out of a bunch of parts, compositionally and tectonically. A classical column is made up of base, shaft, and capital, which, if we listen to Vitruvius, conspire to form a balanced, beautiful unity. Well, I'm here to tell you that the intricate, alluring column capitals are preparing to hold a rally for their rights. When you look at one for a while, it doesn't seem incomplete or otherwise less than a column. It is simultaneously individuated, yet part of something else. This is not a contradiction if you're thinking ecologically. Robert Venturi, in his book Complexity and Contradiction of 1966, talked about the case of the difficult whole. The difficult whole is a thing which is unresolved because its parts are somehow lively and vibrating and from different sources and times. The difficulty was holism itself, a kind of holistic fundamentalism he identified in late modernism and wanted to break. Specificity of words is so crucial today, especially being precise with what constitutes a real thing. Tim, you and I were just talking about that actually yesterday in the car. Facing Ukraine Gate and a president who believes that he is a king with a great and unmatched wisdom, we need to examine words one by one. Words have been weaponized to cause confusion and violence. Confusion is the opposite state of solidarity. Tim's brilliant takedown of words like nature and world is the first step. Myths of holism are so entrenched in our minds that we fail to notice how the phrase, "the whole is greater than the sum of the parts," commits violence against parts. Nature sounds like a whole, something that bonds all green things together into a kind of kingdom. But there is no kingdom, and certainly no king. Plastic is natural. We have plastic inside our bodies now, apparently. I learned last night. As well as lots and lots of bacteria. Are we natural? If nature is all around us and inside us, where is it really? A blueberry muffin or even dark matter exist more than nature. Real objects can be adjacent to us but also contain us. Even an ideology can be a real object and be part of an ecology, but strangely, nature itself is not ecological, according to Tim. Another word dripping with holism is sustainability. I did my best. You know what I'm saying. Another word dripping with holism is sustainability. Of course, more and more it is getting outed as people are asking, what is it that we are sustaining exactly? And the answer is, wait for it, ourselves. So sustainability is then a reflection of human desire and fear of loss, not a thing that is out there. According to Tim, ecological thought is something far weirder, oscillating between the mysterious and the familiar. Tim and I were just saying yesterday that the Tesla is the perfect, creepy, sustainable death machine. Look, no grill. The familiarity of the combustion engine is gone. We get this happy, smiling face reminding us that it runs on renewable energy and we can all relax. And yet we know that it is insanely fast, quiet, and can drive itself autonomously. What could go wrong? Maybe this gives architects a way to move past the intellectual and aesthetic dead end that we have seen in what I'd call sustainable expressionism. So many green balconies, windmills, and metal louvers pointing back at the industrial machine of the 20th century. Maybe we have been thinking about it all wrong. Maybe we need to enter a dark and playful mode where things are not only not as they seem, but contradictory. Tim has an idea. He says, talk of efficiency and sustainability are simply artifacts of the relentless use of fossil fuels. In a solar economy, you could have a disco in every single room of your house, and way fewer life forms would suffer, perhaps vanishingly few, compared to the act of simply turning on the lights in an oil economy. You could have strobes and decks and lasers all day and night to your heart's content. I love that. We find ourselves at the end of the world, not sad and depressed, but liberated by excess and pleasure. So with that, I welcome you to the stage, Tim.
Start with the lighting. That's what Linnea Tillett said. I was at a conference in Stockholm. It was fall of 2017. It was a weirdly busy moment. A day or so later, I had to make it from Stockholm to Berlin to film some little lectures for an exhibition in Barcelona called After the End of the World. Oh, hello, Simon. That's my son, Simon. He won't appear in this lecture for another few pages. And that's a stone from Avebury, yeah. To film some little lectures for an exhibition in Barcelona called After the End of the World, which was sort of about hyperobjects. My job was to make these lectures and then design some waiting rooms, so the brilliant curators called them, in which the lectures could play, they had figured that the basic format of our time of global warming is waiting. The spooky Beckett-like strangeness of waiting for something to happen. When is this stuff really going to kick in? What a strange question or question feeling. I mean, in a way, isn't it obvious? The Mediterranean zones of Earth are bursting into flame. That was the second summer, I recall, when that really happened big time, else everywhere. Crazy, intense hurricanes. In fact, I had just emerged from my very first hurricane. Well, actually, it was Tropical Storm Harvey by the time it floated slowly over Houston and just sat there like the biggest, baddest mothership from the nastiest, blockbusterist extraterrestrial invasion movie. Thank you for almost laughing. Thank you for really laughing. I guess that's what comes of treating where you live like it's an alien place. The most extreme version being the default Cartesian philosophy, Earth's Western type, seem to have suspiciously deeply wired into our heads. You know, there's this thinking thing, and it's conveniently located somewhere inside of human beings, and probably white male human beings have the only or the best one of those things. And there's this other thing called extension, aka nicely measurable stuff that happens everywhere else, like Australia or the moon or between your back door and the carport. These two things can't mix. They can't swirl around and make an emulsion, even, like oil and vinegar. One of them can swirl around like Harvey. The other one can think about it. And mostly, in my case, the other one can freak out and get really cross, totally inappropriately, with friends. Where's Ashley? Hello, Ashley. I got cross with you. This is me publicly apologizing to my friend Ashley. With friends who haven't checked in because the news has moved on, even though they've never experienced a hurricane, and why would they even know what was happening? Oh, it says here, hello, Ashley. To this extent, what's happening is indeed an alien invasion, and we are the aliens. We are the aliens, invading ourselves in the shape of measurable, cuttable, easy wipe. Insert the tabs here, cut along the dotted line, extension. Extension is a terrifying word, really. One of those simple words that is, in fact, profoundly scary. I had a really bad Twin Peaks-style dream last night. I was a bit nervous about doing this thing, yeah? Thank you, Tom, for helping me feel less nervous. Where all these people had been replaced by demons. They were having a picnic in a park and talking strange metallic things into phones, and where they sat were those little labels on sticks you see in ornamental flower beds, only instead of names like Laura Ponsonby, they had weirdly, disturbingly generic names for flowers or characters in existential plays, like The Girl. I wonder why I had a dream like that before I did this lecture, he mused. You know this idea of the mandrake that shows up in Othello? This root that you can pull and it screams like a human when you pull it? You know, one of my best friend's therapists in Houston is called Harvey. I sucked during Harvey. I sucked so bad. I failed my first hurricane test. This is more than I can say for my first acid test. Passed. Awesome. It took a few days to relax. We'll cut this out. It took a few days to relax into being on hurricane time, not human time. All the side effects of being part of white supremacist, patriarchal, civilization, whateverness, were incarnated in this gigantic, slowly moving, fast whirling thing the size of the distance between London and Copenhagen above our heads. All the side effects suddenly embodied as the one big actual effect, all the stuff we called landscape suddenly weaponized. We made this thing, we synthesized it. Oh, sure, you could spend months figuring out exactly how much global warming had to do with this tropical storm mothership being. Or you could just admit climate contains weather like a heating kettle contains water in various states of boiling. On one level, the question, is this caused by global warming, is as dumb as asking, is the boiling water in this kettle caused by this kettle boiling? Does the bear of weather shit in the woods of climate? Is the Pope of Weather part of the Catholic Church of Climate? You get the picture, I hope. Hey, this is funny, man. How did this patriarchy supremacy thing happen? It did happen, that's for sure. This summer I visited the sacred sites of ancient Britain, mostly because my daughter Claire really wanted to. Avebury and Stonehenge in Wiltshire. I don't know much at all about this period of history. In fact, I'm just going to say right now, I don't know much about stuff that you do, and I feel like all the examples I'm going to bring, including these ones, are basically like coming to a really sophisticated, amazing art opening with all these records of sort of early 80s Phil Collins, you know. It's completely uncool, dude. But on that day when I visited both, I got a very creepy feeling that something terrible happened between the moment at which Avebury was created, the moment of Stonehenge, something called patriarchy. It was actually terrifying. To me, Avebury versus Stonehenge is matriarchy versus patriarchy. How do I get to the next slide, Mr. Slide Controller person? Do I just close it and be all funny like that? Yeah, let's do that. Do I want to enable dictation? No, I bloody don't. Avebury map. Oh, there you go. Okay. To me, Avebury versus Stonehenge is patriarchy versus matriarchy. Avebury is a village. It's a few miles away from Stonehenge. It's a village surrounded and penetrated by intricate spiraling stones. Stonehenge is an isolated monumental spectacle that you have to get bused to, and I suddenly wondered whether that was in fact exactly the same as when they were made. William Blake always pictured Stonehenge as the locus of hierarchical, ideological alienation, mystery in a bad way, and power. I think he was right. Avebury has that is it a joke or is it a real overlap? Or as my daughter said, those rough found object-like stones are arranged in what might amount to a gigantic boob joke. Stonehenge is deadly serious and involves slaves dragging massive phallic rocks for 200 miles, and it's frightening. Stonehenge is where all the astronomers go because it's already about regularized measurement as opposed to finding non-human art in the shape of the hills and making a sort of lens for them by finding stones. Stonehenge isn't found objects at all. I used to think Stonehenge and Salisbury testing range, where it resides, it's like this army base, right? And the creation of English heritage by Mrs. Thatcher in the early 80s to police the hippies and monetize it were different, very contrastive phenomena. They aren't, I suddenly figured out. They're the same. This is a patriarchal spectacle. There's a weird way in which you can't photograph Avebury. Let's see, let's get Stonehenge. Here we go. There, see? There's a way in which you can't photograph Avebury. It just disappears, like emptiness, like a trick or a joke, illusion and reality overlapping. Michael Tausig points out that in a shamanic culture, everyone knows that the shaman is also a bit of a con artist. The difference between real magician and stage magician might be a bit metaphysical, sort of patriarchal illusion. Not that everything is really an illusion or a lie. For that to be true, the sentence, everything is an illusion or a lie, would have to not be an illusion or a lie. So that logic doesn't work. True and false aren't the same. They overlap, they oscillate like shadows, dappling a forest clearing, or like Avebury stones and their shadows playing in and around the village. It's peaceful and playful and weird there. You can photograph Stonehenge. You can only photograph it. That's what it is. That's because Stonehenge in itself is a camera. It takes photographs. When you have your picture taken in front of it, that's Stonehenge photographing you. The difference between Avebury and Stonehenge is the difference between time, or rather the infinite temporalities, the infinite misty flowing time fields of rocks and grass and humans and trees and houses and shops with crystals in, and its measurement. One kind of measurement, one ring of stones to rule them all. It's as if the circle of Stonehenge is still saying, whoever built this has the biggest, most accurate ruler on earth, so you have to bow to it. And we're not going to tell you how it works, so you just have to spectate it, like the ball drop in Times Square. Let's see if we got this. Look at this. You can buy this from the gift shop. It sort of sums it up. You had a Stonehenge Monopoly, fast-dealing property trading game. It's already that. Like, that's why you can put it on a box. You know, that's not like a funny paradox thing. It's actually a horribly not paradoxical thing. I finally looked up the word rhythm. When I dug around a bit, I found out the thum part refers to regular measurement, and the ri part refers to body fluids. Fluids in general, but whatever is called body fluids in particular. Even a stopped stone circle is right twice a year. So, now's the fun bit of the lecture. We're going to have a little talk about sizeism, and that means we're going to have to look at Spinal Tap. The sizeism in Spinal Tap, that's exactly it. No one ever knew what Stonehenge was for, or what the fuck the Druids were doing there. They just gawped at the size.
In ancient times, years before the dawn of history, lived an ancient race of people, the Druids. No one knows who they were or what they were doing, but their legacy remains hewn into the living rock of Stonehenge.
Stonehenge, where a man's a man and the children dance to the pipes of Pan. And you, my love, won't you take my hand? We'll go back in time to that mystic land.
So completely like Julian Cope, who actually lives in Stonehenge.
Where the dewdrops cry and the cats meow, I will take you there, I will show you how.
The little children of Stonehenge, beneath the haunted moon, for fear that daybreak might come too soon.
Yes, well, it's slightly unfair to Julian Cope, actually, because he's pretty pro-feminist. And I just have to, I'm so sorry, I've just got to show another one.
Oh, let's hear yours. Let's hear your suggestions.
Stonehenge. Stonehenge.
What
Best
about it?
production value we've ever had on stage.
But we haven't got the equipment. We
Not
haven't
yet,
got
we
Stonehenge.
don't. Let's start.
We haven't got.
Please, just a moment. Look, it's quite simple. This is, you know, Ian can take care of this. And this is it. Look.
Consider it done. This looks absolutely perfect. I mean, it's the right proportions. It'll be this color, right?
Yeah.
Yeah. That's just terrific. I mean, it almost looks like the real thing.
Got it.
Yeah. When we get the actual set, when we get the piece, it'll follow exactly these specifications. I mean, even these contours and everything.
I don't understand you.
But I mean,
when the actual piece.
Well, when you build the actual piece.
But this is what you asked for, isn't it?
What?
Well, this is the piece.
This is the piece?
Yes.
Are you telling me that this is it? This is scenery? Have you ever been to Stonehenge?
No, I haven't been to Stonehenge.
The triptychs are 20 feet high. You can stand 4 men up them.
Ian, I was asked to build
This is
a
insane.
triptych
This isn't a
18
piece of
inches
scenery.
wide. Look, this is what I was asked to build. 18 inches, right here, it's specified, 18 inches. I was given this napkin, I mean...
Forget this.
How they danced to...
I do not, for one, think that the problem was that the band was down. I think that the problem may have been that there was a Stonehenge monument on the stage that was in danger of being crushed by a dwarf. All right? That tended to understate the hugeness of the object.
I really think you're just making a much too big a thing out of it.
Making a big thing out of it would have been a good idea.
Okay. The only funny bit, yeah, but there has to be one. Thank you, Spinal Tap. So yeah, the sizeism has been part of it for since the inception is the point. That's why they can do that. Avebury is a crop circle. Stonehenge is a camera. It's the objectification of the measuring device, the ruler versus the true overlapping with false situation that happens in Avebury. Stonehenge is like NASA with those huge rockets on lawns. I live near to NASA, and every time you go there, you're sort of struck by the fact that there are these very domestic-looking, kind of University of California-looking lawns with these massive Saturn V rockets on them and stuff. Of course, there are aliens over Stonehenge, like in the legends of the 1970s. It's all alienation. All the druids were fake. Blake was right. Start with the lighting. Linnea Tilliett said that. The lighting, it's not an optional extra in so-called landscape design. It's the whole thing, the Catholic Church of energy in which the whole thing is bathed. Lighting. It's a great way to start talking about so-called landscape architecture because it doesn't make a distinction between inside and outside. You can have lighting indoors, but that lighting will spill out the windows and into the street. So it's not really indoor lighting. And if you've ever seen Gregory Crewdson's Twilight series, you'll know some lovely photographs that sort of exemplify what I'm talking about here. You can have lighting in the street or in the park, and that lighting will spill into your bedroom, suffusing it with its glow, or its horrifying roaring flame if you're my new friend Hilton Kelly and you live in Port Arthur in southeast Texas, and a gasoline flare roars into life and terrifies and poisons your whole town one night in the last couple of years. It has a terrifying story to it. I met Hilton while working on this BBC radio show that I'm doing called The End of the World Has Already Happened. I interviewed him as he is a very significant figure in the current struggle for environmental justice. He's got all these awards, and there's this photo of him shaking hands with Obama, and it's amazing. He still doesn't have a job, but he's doing this. He's fighting with all his might to protect his broken, sweet town from oil refinery poison and hurricane flood death. You know, he's like future us if we're not him already. Hurricanes and poison, like lightning, ignore the artificial and metaphysical boundaries between inside and outside, the ones Mesopotamian humans started to make much too rigid with granaries and homes and walls and distinctions between scary toxic nature and domesticated submissive cattle or chattels or capital. Soon after Stockholm, I moved into a house belonging to the Menil collection, right on the same street. The beauty of living near a great art museum is you don't have to go to it. You are relieved of the guilt. I told you it would be Phil Collins level, Philistine stupidity, yeah? You are relieved of the guilt of having to look like you care in the right way about the works of Max Ernst. The museum is part of my street, as is the Rothko Chapel. They're fixing the lighting in there right now. I don't like the idea of that. I like the slightly too dark, slightly depressive coziness of the light in there on a grey day. It surrounds you like a fuzzy cloud of vagueness, rather like the dust after rain petrichor smell of the stucco plaster on the walls, the weirdly recent-seeming linseed oil smell of the canvases, those aubergine dark dimensional gateways, gigantic and quiet, the way the room surrounds you and contains you like flesh. Outside the chapel is the lawn on which all the young freaks of Houston seem to gather to smoke pot and do yogic sexual display, like balancing one another on upturned feet. You can imagine you're in LA or San Francisco for a moment. Start with the lighting. It's weird when there's a huge violent storm. The lighting, it's so pale and twilightish, or right in the middle of the day, and suddenly you can't be outside because the few drops of big rain have become a maelstrom of spattering, roaring, hissing intensity. All the other things, the trees, the streets, the life forms running for cover, the car you're floating in through suddenly deep water in a river that used to be a street 10 minutes ago, seem to have materialized inside of this thick, intense, vivid space. You see, it's not really plastic extension, the ultimate model for which is purely empty void, marked off in an easy-to-read grid-like pattern. The ultimate version of Cartesian extension would be this kind of empty space, big chunks of nothing without characteristics, without color or shape or texture or energy. Quantum theory and object-oriented ontology, which is one of my favorite hobbies, hello Graham, tell us that there's no such thing as a transparent empty space like that, no such thing as a substance that underlies everything like bland clay that then gets decorated with the candy sprinkles of accidentality. No in-between non-things that separate me and this tree, me and the window, subject and object. It's all landscape, and it's much, much more than that. It's not a painting you're looking at through a screen or a thing in a shop separated from you by a huge plate of glass like it's in a totally different dimension. It's all atmosphere, lighting, surrounding, enveloping and penetrating, coming through the artificial boundary with a specific frequency and amplitude, like the yellow light pouring through the cat door. Oh, sorry, Björk. Pouring through the cat door in a picture that isn't of Björk, called Close Encounters of the Third Kind. What could lighting mean if it doesn't mean lights? It could mean the elemental, the elements. Houses don't banish the outside. Latex clothing made of oil made of fossilized plant cell walls doesn't totally keep stuff out. You feel the texture of things through the latex texture, the feel of the chair you're on translated into latex language, the seat of the chair in the key of latex. Cultures that understand the world as magic aren't about totally giving in to outside forces. They're not the opposite of keeping them out with plastic death drive impulses. They're about making a deal with the elements, the forces that keep on and on coming no matter what. Maybe this time the spider is actually a good spirit who wants to help you. Last week she tried to poison you and you had to ward her off. Now she's here to offer something. You don't know from moment to moment whether the element is an elixir or whether it's a poison gas. You live in a wonderfully strange world of ambiguity, alive in the sense that it's fluid and temporal, constantly shifting and changing. And actually, you live in as many worlds as there are things coexisting with you. And it's not just you, the human so-called subject, making the deals. Right now, Formica Tabletop World is making a deal with MacBook World, which is making a deal with Tim's ideas for this lecture world, Early Morning Light World, Metallic Venetian Blind World, and Hangover World. What is called world is actually a symphony or cacophony of overlapping elements, like different tones produced by different synthesizers, all playing together, sometimes in phase, sometimes out of phase. Synthesizers, the musical ones, pretend to be other instruments, sometimes. They can pretend to be strings. My father's generation of violinists got excluded from recording studios because the ARP Pro Soloist string synthesizer did such a good job of pretending to be strings in the mid-70s, and you can see a massive ARP at the end of Close Encounters, actually. But string instruments are also pretending to be string instruments. Violins are also landing pads for flies or dust. Violins are also sweet, resinous smells. Violins are also things sitting in violin cases, not making a sound at all. Like styrofoam cups, they get caught, they get up to all kinds of things, other than just performing a function sometimes for some humans. A synthesizer is sort of saying something true about instruments in general. They're not just instruments, they're only always pretending to be instruments because they can pretend to be something else. They can pretend to be something else because what they are totally and utterly withdraws from the ways in which they are accessed by musicians' fingers, dust, and violin cases, and ideas about instruments in lectures in architecture schools. A synthesizer doesn't make sounds out of raw materials. Those waves it uses, those filters you apply, those patches you put together, they're other beings in their own right. They're also synthesizers. A sound wave is made of lots of beats. If you slow it down enough, it stops being a smooth sound and starts to become a series of pulses. A synthesizer of a particular kind makes a certain kind of deal with the synthetic beings that it gathers together. In the case of the Roland D50 from the later 1980s, just listen to Love Sexy by Prince. Those beings include samples of the opening attack of a conventional instrument like an oboe or a drum, menus of different waveforms generated by the tone generators in the synth, effects that you can add using the thin little push buttons on the keyboard, and so on. When I arrived in Boulder, I thought I'd arrived on the moon. How's that for a fantastic segue? I was like Mr. Clean in Apocalypse Now. The light and space of Vietnam really put the zap on his head. And the light and space of Colorado did the exact same thing to me. I thought the sky was about 10 inches above my head, being an English chap, suddenly to find that it was miles and miles above my head, suddenly to realize that there really was a Milky Way, and that it really spread out like a wide, glittering silk streamer all the way across the sky, to see that in the intense high-altitude light, it was as if I could almost see all the way around objects, as if every blade of grass was its own precious blade of pale green, distinct and sharp in the laser sunlit air. Then I began to have this terribly creepy feeling. Lawns. There were lawns front lawns. I would go out for a walk and gradually find myself surrounded by them. It's why I started writing the way I do about ecology, the way human beings had created these huge, flat, horizontal Barnett Newman paintings in front of their houses, these death spaces where mostly men scythed away like death with lawnmowers and weed whackers and, talking of Agent Orange, Roundup, its nephew, both Monsanto products. Agent Orange for your home, to make things green and flat and perfect and smooth, to symbolize your private property, the privacy of your property. Don't step on the grass, as if your house was putting out its tongue, rolling out the green carpet, showing you what it had eaten that day, aka nothing at all, just green space. The Republican, small r, English poet Andrew Marvell called it annihilating all that's made to a green thought in a green shade. Pure flat green, pure flat extension, just about as pure nothing as you can get, horticulturally speaking, as if one could indeed achieve that pure Cartesian extensional substance. Of course, because it's not really possible, you have to do extreme violence. Then you unfold a lawn chair, sit back, and contemplate your handiwork until it starts to pour with rain. That's basically the story of what happened to the planet during the ongoing explosion we call the Anthropocene, in particular the moment at which colonialism really got going in the 17th century, when it seemed progressive for someone like Andrew Marvell to talk the way he did about democratically levelling the playing field. Shame about the moles and the flowers that had to die to make sure everyone got the fun of having something like what happens in front of a European stately home, in front of their house. Everyone gets to have a Blenheim Palace of their own. That's democracy, folks. Maybe that's why there's this American fascination with bungalows and ranches. Then there was Flatirons Mall, with its crooked, funky cartoon of Pearl Street Mall in downtown Boulder. You walked down it until it came to an end, a set of railings overlooking a gigantic parking lot, a fun, stupid, synthesized parody of downtown Boulder, which, because of the way the economics works, has by now become a rather fun, stupid, synthesized parody of itself. The funky, crooked, fake lane ended, and there was the void, not in the form of grass this time, but in the form of a gigantic swathe of flat concrete for parking cars on. The end of the stage. It was like peering around to see the backstage area, the part where actual people have to work and wait and debrief and get ready to perform. I was struck a couple of years ago. Here we go. Hello, Björk. There you are. I was struck a couple of years ago at the Day Into Night Festival in Houston by this same thought. To make music sound like it's coming from nowhere, or maybe from heaven, you have to seal off the stage area. All conventional Western music, since Pope Gregory sorted it all out and banned the bodily thingly nasal Semitic qualities of instruments and voices, has had the quality of synthesizers music coming out of speakers, as if the music came from nowhere, acousmatic, as Michel Chion puts it. To achieve this idea of sound coming out of the void, actual human beings have to inhabit smelly, mildewy trailers behind the backstage area, and to get to the stage at all, they have to traverse a region of dark, wet pee and beer and rain-puddly tarmac filled with cigarette ash. What blew my mind was that even Björk had to do this kind of thing. I thought that if you made it as a musician, somehow you would have the privilege of having to avoid this interstitial no space, the one that at planet scale we call the biosphere, or everything else that isn't really happening because it's just automated, because it's just called nature, or the other life forms without whose sacrifices we couldn't get to feel like it was just us humans strutting and fretting upon the stage. When I walked back to her trailer and had these thoughts, a whole set of illusions evaporated. The amount of energy and bleach and defoliant we have to pump around and onto the stage set to make it look the way it does, to make it look like LA or Oslo or Mesopotamia or medieval Brussels. The fact that we've been doing this for thousands of years, the fact that mostly planet Earth is now a nasty backstage area of human pee puddles with cigarette ash in them. Her DJ set was excellent. Björk had surrounded herself on three sides with real actual trees, and she was wearing a mask. Of course, the press didn't get it. They thought she was hiding behind artificial screens. She wasn't. She had become the trees. The trees were gazing at us humans in the audience. Her mask was gazing at us, the gaze being the psychoanalytic term for the way an object glitters at us, like the way that very strange evil horse statue. You ever go to DIA, Denver Airport, and you're sort of leaving there's this horse, and as you're going past, the sort of red glass eyes go, have a nice trip, you know. The gaze that there's a psychoanalytic term for the way that objects glitter us, like that strange evil horse statue at Denver International Airport. She was a synthesizer, and she was playing DJ in the key of tree. She had let herself be touched. Literally, she was camouflaged by taking on the colors and textures of plant life. Camouflage. It means becoming the surface that you're on. In a way, hiding evolved before there was anything else to see, because in order to have eyes, you have to have light-sensitive cells, and in order to have those, you have to have the ability to be a chameleon. And maybe, like me and Graham Harmon are fond of saying, there is a much more benevolent and ecologically wise way of thinking of ourselves. We're not like Pac-Man at all, having to eat the whole universe to make it mean something. Trying to do that is inevitably violent because it's strictly impossible. We are samplers and synthesizers who can take on as much as we humanly can with our human form, the sounds and textures and colors and smells of other beings. Do I have another slide? Oh yeah, I do. Let's leave Björk up here for now. All lizards, just to change the subject for a sec, have some kind of chameleon power. A couple of years ago, a few months after the show, in fact, I inherited a bearded dragon from Björk's best friend's son, who was staying in Houston at the time. I was amazed by how he could hypnotize my cat. You know, these sort of Australian lizardy things, and they got these big crests, you know. My cat Oliver got hypnotized by him. This lizard had a great defense of doing absolutely nothing at all. By standing very still, he blended with the reddish-green fake rocks and sand in his tank. Oliver, being a cat, sees mostly in colors that look like that, so I marveled at him trying to focus on the lizard, his eyes crossing and actually falling asleep. Lizards defend themselves in the cheapest, weakest way possible. This whole idea that they're tyrants or emperors who ruled the earth is ridiculous, and an all-pervasive anthropocentric story we tell ourselves for some reason, as if they were the Roman Empire, feline animals being the Middle Ages, and then along came the modern primates with their bone axes launched into the air and becoming space shuttles. Lizards are rubbish. That's the chapter of a book I'm writing. I'm writing this book with this chap called Nicholas Royal. Could we call the first chapter Lizards Are Rubbish? I really want to vent about lizards. The first time I vented in public about lizards. You have to forgive the intensity of the venting here. Lizards are rubbish. Lizards like to be, you know, the Nonni, who's the son of Jon Gunnar, the mayor of Reykjavik, he brilliantly named this lizard Ninja, yeah, because he does nothing at all. He just doesn't do the ninja thing, yeah. Right. Lizards like to be on top because agentially they're on the bottom. They're solar panels, and if they're not up high, they're going to die for lack of sunlight. They're like leaves with legs. They're terrifyingly weak. Their arms are like noodles. They're tadpoles who somehow didn't die when the puddle evaporated, and this whole tail falling off business isn't clever. It's just a tadpole thing. Even Attenborough's at it. In his most recent show, there's this lizard who has evolved into what he says is the ingenious defense of flipping itself over and falling on its back. What the fuck? It says that here. What the fuck? It's just falling down in front of the predator. Maybe the predator's so freaked out by this absurd weakness that it doesn't bother to try to eat the lizard. All those spines and crests, and so thank you for almost agreeing with me by laughing. That's awesome. For my ego, yeah, my wannabe inner biologist, like my cousin. All those spines and crests and stuff are really soft and delicate when you stroke them, and in your hand, they feel like they're made of baggies of water within slightly bigger baggies of water. Evolution doesn't have a telos, it doesn't have a Ford's gear. The idea that things are beautifully adapted for whatever can only occur with hindsight. Life forms just don't quite die before they have kids. That's what adapt actually means. If it didn't get you killed before you had kids, you get to pass on that flipping over behavior or that ability to blush the same color as the rock you're lying on. Your glum expression and staring eyes, like a meditator sitting on a cushion, vulnerable to everything happening inside and out. All the advanced meditation manuals say stuff that lizards would like the sun is always shining. It's just temporarily obscured by clouds. Just rest and trust. The sun is coming. Here comes the sun. And I say, it's all right. Surely we can afford to become a little more weedy, as they say in English, than we have been. A little bit more like flowers in the wrong place that we call weeds, or the weeds with legs we call lizards. Surely something like landscape architecture, shorn of its landscape stage design, aestheticized anthropocentrism, wow, that's a lot of adjectival words there, would feel more like what we're calling, at some future unknown strange point, synthetic landscape. Sure, you're making some kind of stage set, but you're making it by blending with things as far as you can go without dying, which would be inconvenient for everyone because dolphins can't turn off the oil pipes with their flippers. This is on us, guys. You're making a stage set out of rice paper that can get wet and dissolve in the rain. You're making a thing that isn't ever just pure flat extension, as void-like as possible. You're paying attention to the spaces you call outside, interstitial, in between, not as relevant or as grand as the Blenheim Palace you think you're building. Then the building, the thing you're doing that you think is superior to landscape whatever, its poor relation and definitely an afterthought, is actually something that materializes within the holistic vision of your synthetic landscape, a bit like the things in Tom's living. I love the things in Tom's living room. You know, it's awesome. The thing that you think is superior to landscape, whatever, its poor relation and definitely an afterthought, is actually something that materializes within the holistic vision of your synthetic landscape, like something materializing out of a field of elemental colored mist, a flowing, moving, oozing smoke of design that doesn't have to stay put and be maintained with a whack-a-mole violence. In Oxford, there's this place called Magdalen College School, and eventually it became Magdalen College Library. One of my ancestors founded it, and he was also the chaplain of Magdalen College. John Rouse Bloxham. That's my middle name is Bloxham, B-L-O-X-A-M. I know it's a bit funny, isn't it? That was his name, and there's a painting by William Holman Hunt, the pre-Raphaelite artist, called Morning on Magdalen Tower, and that's him on the far right there with this sort of baldy bit. Yeah? Painted in 1890. Another Bloxham, Matthew Holbeach, published Principles of Gothic Architecture in 1829. Fairly soon afterwards, John Ruskin started to praise Gothic architecture for the way in which it seemed to value the pleasures of the workers, the way all those functionless spandrels and crinkly decorations are in excess of the function of the building, just like how evolution actually works, by random mutation, that is, more like writing a poem than planning as efficiently as possible based on a logic that excludes the ambiguity necessary for including other life forms in your design, the fact that you don't need to do the death drive overkill thing, and make sure that what you're using will last for thousands or hundreds or even tens of years. Making it out of something soft and weak. It's okay, you won't die, you're too smart for that anyway. More's the pity, maybe. The ecological future, if there is one, the only livable future, as in things being different from now, must be one, it's now quite clear, is about pleasure, not efficiency. Thank you, sir. Polar bears and coral being alive is pleasurable for them, and we can be pleasure chameleons and learn to enjoy that kind of pleasure ourselves. After all, quite a lot of other life forms are directly responsible for our very existence, so it would be terribly nice to make sure they stick around. So 2 Bloxhams. This is the Phil Collins bit, 100%, right? One of them contributed to the Gothic revival that Magdalen College was definitely part of, and another worked there as teacher and chaplain. And I didn't know jack about any of that. Isn't that funny? I had decided to do my BA and then my PhD in a place that was deeply influenced by one of my Victorian period ancestors, and I had no clue about it at all. I found out during the second year of my PhD, aka just before I finished being there. Why did I end up there in the first place? Well, I'd been seduced by a video of John Betjeman, alum of Magdalen, reading his poem, Summoned by Bells, a video in which water, meadows, very rare orchids, bridges, trees, buildings in what are called landscapes seduced me. That's Simon again. When you study at Magdalen College, you're basically in a beautiful insane asylum for clever people. There's a little shop with uneasy laughter there. There's a little shop where you can buy milk, stamps, baked beans, cigarettes. There's a mailbox in the Porter's Lodge where you can put real mail with real stamps on. You don't really technically ever have to leave, so you go for a walk. You walk through a gate into Addison's Walk, designed by Capability Brown. You walk past a meadow containing a very rare orchid, the snake's head fritillary. In the thousands in the spring, when the choir sings from the roof of the bell tower. You get to a place called Holywell Ford. I don't have a photo of that, but it's sort of like 100 yards away from this bridge, yeah? You get to a place called Holywell Ford, a water mill that's part of the college where Dylan Thomas had it away with the wife of the historian A.G.P. Taylor. Outside Holywell Ford is a lamppost, and it's the one Lucy finds Mr. Tumnus leaning on when she emerges from the wardrobe into Narnia. At this point, you're totally hallucinating with or without the benefit of psychedelic chemicals. You round the corner and walk down the wooded path by the stream towards the bridge where Winnie the Pooh taught everyone to play poo sticks. You open a gate into the Fellows' Garden. Here's the Fellows' Garden. The Fellows' Garden, which is the garden of talking flowers outside the looking-glass house in the Alice book. It's also the place where Keats wrote a lot of the poem Endymion, which is all about how what we call things, in particular things of beauty, aren't really objectified objects at all, but worlds, atmospheres, elemental, billowing clouds of coloured dry ice that absorb you and let you rest and sleep and turn you, like when you're asleep, back into the thingly being you actually are, rather than the so-called subject with a name and cultural and ideological and philosophical justifications for being above all the other things in the world. The being you think you are when you're awake. Right there, you're still in college, but the buildings have disappeared. When you exit the garden, and continue round Addison's Walk, the tower and the college reappear as if they're materializing out of the atmosphere, out of the atmospheric space of the landscaping, like crystals precipitating out of a liquid. You hear the organ in the chapel, an early version of the synthesizer with its brass and woodwind stops. Let's see if I can. You come back here to the gate. Brass and woodwind stops. The only trouble is how the church had a monopoly on these lovely devices and all kinds of rules about what they were and what they could do. Make music as if it came from heaven, the organist hidden behind a wall in a way very unlike Björk hidden in the trees. You could really get lost in a place like that. You could really blend into the background and disappear. Thank you very much.